In the vast, silent theater of space, the line between the known and the unknown is razor thin. For the men and women who have crossed that line, their testimony carries a unique weight. They are not casual observers. They are trained engineers, pilots, and scientists whose very lives depend on precision and accuracy. This is the story of 5 of them, 5 decorated NACS astronauts who encountered phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Starting with a man whose credibility was as solid as the command module he flew. The year was 1965. The Cold War was no longer just a terrestrial affair, it had expanded into the cosmos. The space race between the United States and the Soviets was at a fever pitch, a high-stakes competition for technological and ideological supremacy. America was still playing catch-up. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NAS, had successfully put men into orbit with the Mercury program. But these were short, simple flights. The next step was crucial, proving that humans could live and work in space for extended periods, a necessary prerequisite for any future trip to the moon. This was the era of Project Gemini, the vital and often overlooked bridge between the single-man orbital flights of Mercury and the lunar landings of Apollo. The mission was Gemini 4, a flight loaded with historic objectives. Its commander was James McDivitt, a man forged in the crucible of conflict and advanced engineering. A veteran of the Korean War with 145 combat missions to his name, he was also a brilliant aeronautical engineer and a graduate of the Air Force Experimental Test Pilot School. He was known for his calm demeanor and meticulous attention to detail, a man not prone to flights of fancy. His co-pilot was the energetic Ed White, who would, during this very mission, achieve a monumental milestone by becoming the first American to walk in space. The entire world was watching. Every moment of the 4-day mission was scrutinized by Mission Control in Houston and broadcast to a captivated public. The pressure to perform flawlessly was immense. On the 3rd of June 1965, during the second day of their mission, while drifting in orbit high above the Pacific, something happened. With their planned experiments paused, McDivitt was simply observing the Earth below when he saw something out of his window that did not belong there. It was a cylindrical object, white or silvery in appearance, with a long, thin projection sticking out from its side, which he described as looking like a pole or an arm. His training as a pilot and engineer kicked in instantly. He tried to assess its distance and size, but in the featureless black void of space, with no points of reference, it was impossible. Was it a small piece of debris just a few hundred feet away, or was it an enormous object miles away? He grabbed his 16mm movie camera and a still camera, trying to capture the object on film as it moved on a parallel course to his own capsule. It was not tumbling like space junk. It appeared to be a distinct, solid object maintaining a stable position relative to him. He reported it to Mission Control, his voice remaining professional and steady, yet unable to hide his complete bewilderment. He described what he was seeing, trying to make sense of it. Then, just as mysteriously as it had appeared, it vanished from his sight. The entire encounter lasted for only a few minutes, but it left a permanent impression on McDivitt. Back on Earth, the investigation began. The results of his photographic efforts were deeply frustrating. The movie camera footage was washed out by the intense glare of the sun reflecting off the capsule, and the handful of still images were of such poor quality they were essentially useless for identification. This lack of clear evidence created an opening for an official and simple explanation to emerge. NACA officials, and later the government-sponsored Condon Committee, which was tasked with investigating the UFO phenomenon for the Air Force, concluded that McDivitt had simply seen the second stage of their own Titan II rocket. It was the booster that had propelled them into orbit. It was a neat and tidy explanation that closed the case. But for James McDivitt, it was an answer he could never accept. He knew his machine and his mission plan intimately. He knew the orbital mechanics involved. He knew exactly where the Titan booster was supposed to be relative to his capsule, and it was nowhere near his position at that time. He was adamant that the object he saw was something entirely different. For the rest of his life, McDivitt stood by his story with unwavering consistency. He never claimed it was an alien spacecraft. He was too much of a pragmatist for that. He simply stated, time and time again, that it was an unidentified flying object. In his own words, "I was flying with the best crew in the world. We had the best equipment and the best training. I have no idea what it was, but I know it wasn't the Titan II." He represented the quintessential astronaut witness, a highly credible professional who encountered a true unknown and refused to be swayed by an official explanation that did not fit the facts he observed. While James McDivitt was a reluctant witness who spoke only of the facts he observed, our next astronaut was a pioneer who became a vocal advocate for disclosure. Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr., better known as Gordo, was one of the original Mercury 7. The first group of astronauts selected by NAC in 1959. He was a decorated Air Force pilot, an engineering prodigy, and an American hero straight out of central casting. And according to him, his encounters with UFOs began long before he ever strapped into a space capsule. His first major sighting occurred in 1951, years before NACA even existed. Cooper was a young, hotshot pilot flying F-86 Sabre jets with the Air Force over West Germany. During a 2-day period, he and his fellow pilots witnessed large groups of metallic, saucer-shaped objects flying in precise, intelligent formations. They were moving at altitudes and speeds far greater than any known aircraft of the time, including their own top-of-the-line jet. They would pass overhead, executing maneuvers that seemed to defy the known laws of aerodynamics. These were not weather balloons or conventional jets, they were something else entirely, and the experience planted a seed in Cooper's mind. His second, and perhaps most dramatic encounter, happened not in the air but on the ground, at the very heart of American aviation progress. The year was 1957. Cooper was a test pilot and project manager at Edwards Air Force Base in California, the legendary desert proving ground where pilots with the right stuff pushed the boundaries of flight. A professional motion picture crew was on site, filming takeoffs and landings at a dry lakebed for a documentary. Suddenly, a silent, silvery, saucer-shaped craft descended from the clear desert sky. It maneuvered into a landing position and extended 3 landing legs, settling gently onto the dry lakebed just a few hundred yards away from the camera crew. Stunned but professional, the crew kept their cameras rolling, capturing the entire event on high-quality 35mm motion picture film. The craft sat on the desert floor for a few moments before retracting its landing gear, ascending vertically without a sound, and accelerating away at an incredible speed. As the ranking officer on site, Cooper was notified immediately. He interviewed the crew and viewed the developed film himself. He was astounded by its clarity. He followed protocol, securing the film and the camera crew's detailed report in a locked courier pouch. He sent it directly to the Pentagon, to a specific office in Air Force Intelligence. He was told it was a matter of extreme national security and that he would be informed of the findings. He never saw the film again. It vanished into the black hole of military bureaucracy, and the incident was officially buried. Years later, as an astronaut, Cooper would have his own encounter in space. In May of 1963, he was piloting the final and longest mission of the Mercury program. This was a grueling 22-orbit flight aboard the capsule he named Faith 7. On his final pass over Earth, as he approached the NACA's tracking station in Musgrave, Australia, he saw something incredible. A greenish, glowing object was moving towards his capsule on an eastward trajectory. It was not a satellite and it was not a star. It was a distinct, solid object. Crucially, this was not just a subjective visual sighting. The tracking station at Musgrave, which was monitoring his capsule's every move, also picked up the object on its radar. They confirmed an unidentified target moving from west to east, corroborating Cooper's report in real time. This was not a hallucination brought on by fatigue. It was a real, physical object tracked by both a human eye and sophisticated radar equipment. On his return to Earth, reporters were eager to ask him about the object, but he was forbidden by NAS officials from discussing the incident. After he retired from both the Air Force and NAC, Gordon Cooper felt he was finally free to speak his mind. He became one of the most outspoken advocates for UFO disclosure. He was convinced, based on his multiple sightings and his direct knowledge of the Edwards cover-up, that Earth was being visited. In a famous letter to the United Nations in 1978, he wrote, "I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets, which obviously are a little more technically advanced than we are here on Earth. I feel that we need to have a top-level coordinated program to scientifically collect and analyze data from all over the world, and to determine how best to interface with these visitors in a friendly fashion." Gordon Cooper was more than just a witness. He was a believer, a hero who used his platform to demand the truth. No mission in human history carries the weight, the hope, and the sheer audacity of Apollo 11. In July of 1969, the entire world held its breath, united for a fleeting moment as three men journeyed across the black void to do what had only ever been done in fiction: land on the moon. The commander was Neil Armstrong, the stoic and brilliant leader. The command module pilot was Michael Collins, the lonely sentinel who would orbit the moon alone, and the lunar module pilot was Dr. Edwin Buzz Aldrin, a brilliant engineer with a doctorate in astronautics from Emma. These men were the absolute pinnacle of the astronaut corps. They were not just pilots. They were scientists and engineers at the top of their fields, chosen for their ability to perform under unimaginable pressure. Their journey to the moon was a meticulously planned 4-day transit. Every object, every variable, every piece of data was accounted for. Every moment was scripted, or so they thought. Roughly 2 days into their flight, somewhere in the silent 200,000-mile gulf between the Earth and the moon, the crew noticed something strange. Out of the window of their command module Columbia, they saw an object. It was pacing their spacecraft. It was a point of light, and through their small onboard monocular they tried to get a better look. It seemed to have a somewhat L-shaped appearance, and it was flashing, catching the light of the distant sun in a rhythmic way. The crew's first reaction was not panic or excitement, but calm, methodical analysis. Their years of training kicked in. They knew that after their spacecraft had separated from the third stage of the mighty Saturn V rocket, known as the SAF-4B, the massive booster was supposed to be on a completely different trajectory. But it was the only logical man-made explanation. The crew discussed it amongst themselves. They were acutely aware that every word they transmitted was being heard by Mission Control and, potentially, by the world's media. Any mention of a UFO would create a global firestorm, distracting from the mission's critical objectives. So they decided not to raise an immediate alarm. Instead, they keyed their microphone and calmly asked Mission Control in Houston a carefully worded technical question. "We were wondering if you had any idea where the SFOURB is with respect to us." It was a simple, professional query, but the subtext was enormous. They were asking for the location of the only man-made object that should have been anywhere near them. The response from Houston was the moment this sighting went from a simple question to a profound mystery. After checking the tracking data, Mission Control radioed back with a definitive answer. The SFORBS stage was not nearby. In fact, it was over 6,000 miles away from their position. Inside the capsule, the crew looked at each other. The object they were watching, the light that was pacing them on their historic journey to the moon, was not theirs. It was something else entirely. Michael Collins would later write about it in his autobiography, Carrying the Fire, confirming the event and his own puzzlement. He recalled using the sextant to get a better look, but it was too difficult to focus on. All three men saw it. All three were baffled by it. They continued to observe it for a time before it eventually disappeared, and they turned their focus back to the primary mission of landing on the moon. For decades, the story remained largely under wraps, a piece of mission trivia known only to insiders. But in later years, Buzz Aldrin began to speak about it more openly. True to his scientific training, he has always been extremely careful with his words. He has never claimed it was an alien ship. He has speculated that it could have been one of the 4 panels that flew off when the lunar module was extracted from the rocket stage. However, that explanation remains problematic. The object paced them for a significant period of time, and the crew observed it as a single coherent point of light. Detached panels would likely be tumbling, scattering sunlight erratically, and they would be expected to drift away from the spacecraft on their own trajectories, not keep pace with it. Aldrin himself acknowledged this uncertainty, stating, "There was something out there that was close enough to be observed, and what could it be? We decided it wasn't worth talking about to mission control, because we were afraid that someone might get the wrong idea. We were very cautious." The fact that these men on this mission saw something they could not explain remains one of the most powerful UFO encounters on record. If you were to build the perfect astronaut witness from the ground up, you would likely end up with someone like Franklin's story Musgrave. He is without exaggeration one of the most accomplished and diversely educated human beings ever to leave the planet. His resume is almost unbelievable. He holds not one, not two, but 6 graduate degrees in mathematics, computer science, chemistry, biophysics, literature, and medicine, where he specialized as a trauma surgeon. He was also a part-time sheriff's deputy, an accomplished pilot with over 18,000 hours in more than 160 different types of aircraft, and a paratrooper who completed over 800 freefalls. When Story Musgrave talks about what he has seen in space, Ulysses, unlike the astronauts of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo eras, who often made single historic flights, Musgrave was part of the Space Shuttle generation. The Shuttle was a workhorse. It was a reusable spaceplane that turned leaving the planet into a semi-routine commute for 2 decades. This meant that astronauts like Musgrave spent far more cumulative time in orbit, giving them more opportunities to simply observe the environment around them. He flew on 6 separate Space Shuttle missions, conducted 4 spacewalks, and famously helped repair the Hubble Space Telescope. Over the course of this long and distinguished career, Story Musgrave saw things that he still cannot explain. His most famous and perplexing sighting is one he has described in multiple interviews with chilling consistency. On at least 2 of his separate missions, he observed a long, serpentine object in orbit. He described it as being like an eel or a snake, white in color and moving in a way that suggested it was self-propelled. It wasn't tumbling end over end like a piece of space debris, which follows a predictable ballistic arc governed by the laws of orbital mechanics. This object seemed to move with its own agency, undulating as it traveled through the vacuum of space. In one interview, he described it vividly. He said, "I saw a snake out there, a 6 to 8 foot long snake. It's rubbery, it's wiggling. You can see it has a head and a tail, and it's moving through space." For a man with his credentials, a surgeon, a scientist, a man who spent his career fixing satellites and working in the payload bay, to make a distinction between a piece of hardware and something that appears to have a life to it is a monumental statement. He knew what space junk looked like, from discarded bolts to entire rocket stages. This was not that. Musgrave is a scientist to his core, but he is also a philosopher. He has spent more time than almost anyone looking down at Earth and out into the cosmos, and it has given him a unique perspective. He is openly convinced that life exists elsewhere in the universe. He believes it is a statistical certainty. He doesn't definitively claim that the snake he saw was an extraterrestrial life form, but he places it in a category of deep, unresolved mysteries. He is presenting a body of experience, a collection of strange data points gathered over a long career on the frontier. He has spoken about other anomalies as well, other lights and objects seen over his many missions that defied easy explanation. He is the seasoned veteran, the old hand who has seen it all and is no longer afraid to speak about the things that linger at the edge of our understanding. His testimony suggests that the UFO phenomenon is not just a feature of the early space race, but a persistent and ongoing mystery in our own cosmic backyard, witnessed by one of the most qualified observers humanity has ever sent into orbit. Our final astronaut is perhaps the most profound and controversial of all. He was not just a witness to a strange light in the sky, he became a messenger, an insider who spent the last half of his life trying to break open a secret he believed would rewrite human history. This was Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14 and the 6th human being to ever walk on the surface of the moon, a man of unimpeachable credentials, including a doctorate in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT. He went further than any other astronaut, stating unequivocally that we are not alone and that the truth has been covered up for decades. In January of 1971, the Apollo program was under immense pressure. The near-catastrophic failure of Apollo 13 had shaken NSA to its core. Apollo 14 was the return-to-flight mission, a critical test of whether the lunar program could safely continue. Commanding the mission was the legendary Alan Shepard, the first American in space, who was finally getting his chance to walk on the moon. Alongside him was Edgar Mitchell, tasked with piloting the lunar module Antares to a precise landing in the rugged Fra Mauro Highlands. Like the Apollo 11 crew before them, they also observed something they could not explain during their journey. On several occasions during the 4-day transit to the moon, Mitchell and his crewmates saw and tracked flashing lights that appeared to be pacing their spacecraft. They were disciplined observers. They reported the sightings to mission control, and for a time, everyone assumed they were simply seeing the reflection from their own discarded Cirque 4B rocket booster. But after performing a series of calculations and observational checks, they determined the object was not their booster and was not behaving like simple debris. It remained unidentified. After a successful lunar landing, Mitchell and Shepard spent over 9 hours on the moon, conducting experiments and collecting nearly 100 pounds of lunar rock. But it was on the journey home, while coasting through the blackness between the moon and the Earth, that something fundamental changed for Edgar Mitchell. Gazing at the brilliant blue marble of our planet suspended in the infinite cosmos, he experienced a profound cognitive shift. It was not a vision or a hallucination. It was an overwhelming, visceral feeling of universal connection. An epiphany he would later describe as a samadhi. He felt an undeniable sense of oneness with the universe, a deep intuition that every atom in his body was connected to every star in the sky. It shattered his purely scientific, mechanistic worldview. He realized that the reality we perceive is only a tiny fraction of a much larger, more mysterious whole, and that consciousness itself might be a fundamental property of the universe. This experience would set the course for the rest of his life. After retiring from NAC and the Navy in 1972, Mitchell did not fade into quiet obscurity. He founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IOS, an organization dedicated to applying rigorous scientific study to the fields of consciousness, human potential, and the very nature of reality. And he began to speak out. He used his unassailable platform as a revered Apollo astronaut to state that based on his own high-level contacts within military and intelligence circles, the UFO phenomenon was absolutely real. His most explosive claim centered on the town where he grew up, Roswell, New Mexico. Mitchell stated with confidence that the infamous 1947 Roswell incident was no weather balloon. He claimed that over the years he had spoken to multiple sources, people who had been sworn to secrecy, descendants of the original military witnesses, and intelligence officers who were speaking to him on their deathbeds. They had all confirmed to him directly that an extraterrestrial craft had indeed crashed, and that non-human biological entities were recovered from the wreckage. He was not speculating, he was relaying what he said were first-hand and second-hand accounts from credible people who were there, or who were part of the subsequent cover-up. According to Mitchell, the cover-up was not orchestrated by presidents or the public-facing government. He insisted that the secret was held by a deeply entrenched and highly compartmentalized special access group within the military-industrial complex, operating outside of legal oversight. This group, he claimed, controlled all information and physical material related to the subject. He believed they had successfully reverse-engineered some of the recovered technology, but had kept it hidden from the world for fear of societal disruption, economic collapse, and the loss of a geopolitical technological advantage. He argued that when presidents or official agencies denied knowledge, they were often telling the truth. As they themselves were not read in to these programs, the official reaction was swift. NACA publicly distanced itself from its former hero, issuing statements that, while Dr. Mitchell was a great American, his personal views were his own and did not reflect the position of the space agency. But Mitchell never wavered. Until his death in 2016, he continued to grant interviews, speak at conferences, and demand that the government release the truth. He was the ultimate whistleblower, a man who had walked on another world and returned with a conviction that the greatest story in human history was being illegally kept from its own people. He remains a monumental figure in the push for disclosure, a testament to the power of a single credible voice against a wall of official secrecy.